The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Titans of Nuclear. I'm Francesco Tassi, and today we have Brian Woods, the head of the School of Nuclear Science and Engineering at Oregon State University. We are very excited to hear from his story, and maybe in Titans fashion, we might start with tell us a little bit about your background before you got to nuclear.
Oh, before we got to nuclear. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Francesco. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate spending the time with me. If we go back to the beginning, grew up in New York. So grew up in the New York City area, and ended up going to undergraduate in school in University of Virginia. I was not a nuclear engineer. I was a mechanical engineer for my undergraduate degree. Didn't really think much. I mean, I knew about nuclear. I mean, clearly, we had Indian Point up in New York, near where I grew up, and there was, of course, the Shoreham power plant, which was kind of a little bit of a fiasco when I was in high school in Long Island. But I didn't really have a lot of thought about a career in nuclear. So again, mechanical engineer. I ended up working for DOE for a couple of years. I was in the Navy for a number of years, and then also supported the Navy as a civilian contractor when I got out. But in the intervening years after I graduated with my undergraduate degree from then around mid-90s, I really started doing a lot more investigation into nuclear power. And it was around 96 when I decided that I thought I wanted to go back to grad school and pursue a graduate degree in nuclear engineering. Didn't realize at the time, or didn't think at the time, I necessarily wanted to go into academia, but I think by the time I got to grad school and had been doing research for a few years, I kind of thought that eventually I would like to make my way into academia. So it kind of was a long process for me to kind of come around to nuclear engineering, but it was certainly worth the wait, I think.
I think there's a lot to unpack there, and some very interesting experiences along the way, and I guess also my curiosity within the Navy. I mean, was that any exposure to particularly more? Almost thinking maybe the submarines, or the Navy operates one of the largest fleets of SMRs in the world.
Yes, but for me, no, none at all, really. So I went into the Navy in 1990, and did one tour. So I finished by 1994. But I was actually a diver, and so and the ship I was on ultimately was a mine countermeasure ship. And so it was a diesel ship. We had a gas turbine and a number of diesels, but it was so nothing nuclear, very conventional, very mechanical, actually. A lot of mechanical engineering stuff on board there, but nothing related to nuclear energy at all. So definitely no. In my case, I got zero exposure to nuclear engineering while I was in the service. Yeah.
Amazing. No, thank you for expanding on that. And so then kind of holding back into that moment where you first sort of realized your interest, or that path closer into nuclear. Really, what initially drew you to nuclear engineering? And then maybe a little bit how about your passion has evolved over the years.
Sure. Yeah. So, and I think probably as I mentioned, right? So, growing up in New York, I used to run cross country in high school, and there was a place called Blue Mountain Reservation up on the Hudson River, and we used to run once a year. We'd have a meetup there, and actually that is in, you can see actually Indian Point from that course. And so that was kind of like literally my first exposure was literally doing a cross country race every year in the kind of the shadow of a nuclear power plant. But again, never really thinking much about, hey, that's a career I want to kind of go into. And even when I was a mechanical engineer, I took a course in power plant system design in my senior year, and I actually still have the textbook, ironically. I really loved the class, and there was a chapter on it in that book on nuclear power, but we didn't cover it in class. It was something that I think I kind of read just on my own, that term, but we'd never really covered anything about it in class. But again, still somewhat agnostic about nuclear, didn't really have a strong opinion either way about it. And I think really what happened with me was around the early 90s, or maybe it was the late 80s. It's been so long now, I can't remember exactly the moment that this kind of happened, but there was around the late 80s, early 90s, I was in a library, and as I said, I think I worked at Department of Energy, and in their building up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, they had a library in the basement. It may have been in that library, or it may have been at another library. I can't exactly remember, but I found a report. It was a Department of Energy report, I guess probably from the late 80s. And what the report did was it basically did an analysis of tried to monetize the environmental impact of a variety of different technologies, energy technologies. And I think it was, I vaguely remember, I think the report was commissioned by maybe the Office of Renewable Energies or something like that. So as you could imagine, if you look at the list at the very end, when they looked at the technologies which had the kind of the lowest environmental cost, it was, like solar photovoltaic and wind power and so on and so forth. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise what the list looked like. And at the very bottom was nuclear power. So they literally, I think either the last or the second to last was nuclear power in this kind of monetization of environmental impact. However, next to nuclear power, there was an asterisk, right? And so I, being curious, I said, well, what is this? I'll look at the footnote. And the gist of the footnote was that, well, when we first did this, nuclear power actually was number one. It had the lowest environmental impact, but we wanted to then take into consideration the potential for severe accidents. And so bottom line is they changed the algorithm for nuclear power and when they compared it to everybody else. And I kind of thought that was really weird, actually. And I was like, wow, that doesn't really seem right. If the algorithm they used for everybody else ended up with a very favorable outcome for nuclear. And so ultimately, that was kind of the very beginning of me getting curious about nuclear power. And I think, again, that was either the late 80s or early 90s. And then I had my stint in the Navy, but I always kind of started continuing to read about different stories in nuclear. When I got out of the service, I was living in Maryland, and I think I went to the University of Maryland library a few times and kind of pulled some books on nuclear power. And by 1996, I was pretty convinced that nuclear power really should have a large part to play in our future energy needs. And this is also the time when climate change was really becoming a hot topic. But even before that, I'd always been really interested in kind of clean air because I read a story, again, probably in the late 80s about how the government was recommending you only eat 2 servings of fish a week because of mercury contamination from coal-fired power plants. And I had always thought that was didn't seem like a great position to take. We'll keep producing this energy, but we got to change the way we eat because of what it's putting out in the air. And so the number of reasons by the mid-90s, I'd really come to the belief that nuclear power could and should have a large kind of part to play when it comes to clean air. And that's kind of what led me then into grad school and where I am today.
That's thank you for that journey, and I think we really see that the aspect of the inquisitive mind and the curiosity, right? Even from seeing it on a cross country hike to continually being curious and asking questions. You mentioned about the role that nuclear energy, that you envision nuclear energy should play. Has that changed in any way from from 96 to today? It's from your perspective, has it and maybe how do you envision its evolution?
Yeah, no, I don't think philosophically, I don't think it's changed, right? I mean, I think that I'm still a believer in having clean air, right? Being able to breathe air and not have to worry about what's in it, but also then, of course, we do know more about climate change now than we did in the mid 90s and the late 80s. And what we know is not made the story any better for us, right? So certainly I think that I'm still a believer that, philosophically, yeah, nuclear's definitely got to be got to be part of that solution. I think the thing that has changed for me, though, I mean, you remember in the mid 90s, you had maybe three nuclear power vendors, right? General Electric and Framatome and Westinghouse, and that was really kind of it. And it was, these very, very large reactors. And I think what's really changed for me, though, the way I kind of look at nuclear, and it is also kind of the evolution of the industry itself, is really this ability for the markets to kind of unleash ingenuity and creativity of people to come up with different ways to kind of crack this nut, right? I mean, it's not, clearly getting, commercially viable electricity or any type of power out of the nucleus. It's not an easy proposition, just like it's not an easy proposition for really any energy source, right? If it was easy, we would have been doing this for millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years anyway. But it's not easy, right? So it takes a little bit of work to think how we can do this and make it commercially viable. And I think to some extent I've become a little bit more optimistic in the sense because whereas before I felt, well, it was kind of controlled by some larger groups and you never know how that's going to play out. But the fact that I think we've been really unleashing the market and the people in it and their creativity and ingenuity to kind of look at this problem from a different perspective, I really do. I am optimistic that we will come to a place where we'll have commercially viable nuclear power that's really going to be able to compete with all the other ways to generate electricity and power and be able to do it in a fashion that's going to help our air be clean.
Absolutely, and an exciting time at it. So after the early start of your career, then maybe you could speak a little bit to your experience at the School of Nuclear Science and Engineering at Oregon State, and that seems like something quite pivotal in your experience and your current role. And if you'd like to share a little bit about the school and about your experience in it.
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. I'm happy to do that. Yeah. So maybe just also, I'll give you a little bit of a preamble of the kind of the intervening years from grad school to when I came out here. So as I mentioned, mid 90s, go to grad school, University of Maryland. I was at the nuclear engineering program there. I got my master's in 99, was still working on my PhD, but I ended up getting a good job offer down with Dominion Energy, the old Virginia Power down in Richmond, Virginia, as a safety analyst. So I went down there in I guess it probably was actually January 2000, and I finished up my PhD then kind of while I was working full time, but ended up working there for a number of years and really liked the people, really liked the work. It was actually a great place to work as a safety analyst. But an opportunity came up, and at the time in the mid 2000s, right, there weren't like a lot of openings for academic positions in nuclear engineering, right? So for a number of reasons at the time, maybe one a year if you were lucky. And so ended up in nuclear news back before the internet, right? Or indeed when we would look for our jobs online, ended up seeing an ad for the job out here at Oregon State in nuclear news and applied, not necessarily thinking that I was going to go or get it, but really kind of at least wanted to see, perhaps explore it. And it actually took a while for that job search to kind of work out. I think it had been maybe 8 months after I sent my application in and my resume before they contacted me. So I'd almost forgotten about it. But then ultimately, got an opportunity to come out here to Oregon State, got to see some of the great things they were doing here. This was right around the time that the research project that eventually became NuScale was kind of in its, they were in the middle of that the initial research project. So I got to chat with Jose Reyes about it a little bit when I came out here and interviewed. But there was a lot of other really exciting stuff going on out here. And I think by the time we were flying back, my wife and I were flying back to the East Coast after the interview. I was really excited. I was really hoping I was going to get the job. Where coming out, I was somewhat, if it happens, it happens. But I'm not. I got a great job. I love the people I work with. But I think by the time I was flying back, I was like, man, I really hope I get this job, because it was really so exciting what they were doing out here at Oregon State. And again, going back to that idea of working to change that paradigm of three big companies doing everything and controlling everything, to maybe unleashing a lot of other folks to kind of look at these problems. And so, yeah, so ultimately, I was lucky enough to get offered the job and came out here in 2003. And yeah, so I got an opportunity to work on the tail end of that project, which ultimately became NewScale. It was a DOE project, a DOE sponsored project through, at the time, it was INEEL. I think I'm getting that correct, before it became INL. And got to work on that project a little bit towards the end of 2003. Certainly got to work with, as we were trying to keep that technology alive before NewScale started up as a company, got to kind of work on those problems as well. Got to work on some of the Westinghouse AP1000 work that we were doing out here. Since 2010, did a lot of gas reactor work as well. So a lot of really neat research, and of course, a lot of really great students over the years, both undergraduates and graduate students. I've really enjoyed working with them over the years. Students are wonderful in the sense that they really still have a lot of that sense of wonder. They haven't been around in the industry for 30 years, maybe like myself, and we can get cynical sometimes, but they're all very much still very, they look at the world with very different eyes, I think, than a lot of folks do. And so it's always great to kind of to work with them and their energy to whether it be in a class or whether it be a research project. But yeah, so yeah, I've been here since 2003. Kind of worked through the ranks, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, and I've been now the school head here since 2020. I actually took over, at least as the interim school head, the week that we shut down for COVID. So the very beginning of my time as school head was somewhat challenging, but obviously things are certainly, thank goodness, are a lot better now. But yeah, so it's been a great journey. I think I just finished 21 years here at Oregon State, and it's been a pretty awesome journey over those years.
Excellent, and that's it. Really kind of made me think of the value and the importance of research and of universities to something as specifically, I think, the nuclear industry, but also other energy generation, and sort of kind of to speaking to that. Uh, you mentioned this sort of past where you just have these kind of three major companies, and now there's kind of a future in this present where we have multiplicity. And and kind of from your perspective, what does it take to unleash some of these new companies, and what is that, and where can a university or an institution like Oregon State University, how is that a piece of that puzzle of unleashing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, kind of you got to have kind of a paradigm shift, right? I mean, you have to really kind of, stop thinking of a particular industry as, oh, it's just a traditional kind of a stagnant industry. There's not a lot going on, so on and so forth. You really have to, instead of telling students, especially, or researchers that work in an area, instead of telling them what they can't do, right? Oh, we can't do that. Oh, we've never done that. Or you change the way you approach these things, and change it from that kind of negative approach to, oh, well, okay, what would we need to do to get that done? So, instead of saying, no, that can't be done, it's too hard, or we tried that before and it didn't work, or no, let's not do that, or no one wants to do that. Start asking the question then, okay, well, that's an interesting idea. What would we need to do to actually make that happen? Or what would we need to do to find out whether that would be a viable idea? And so really kind of just change that kind of approach, I think, to how we look at different problems. And I think that is largely the value of research, right? I mean, in the sense that, I often, a lot of times, a lot of people want some very, let's say, kind of, give me the answer now, what the research is going to be. How long is it going to take? What's the answer going to be? And so on and so forth. And what I try to explain to folks is that Well, if we actually knew the answer, we wouldn't need to do any research on it, right? The whole idea of research is to really try to push the envelope a little bit to kind of find out what we can do, find that boundary, find that limit, or maybe we find that there is no limit and we can really largely keep pushing it as long as we have the passion to do so. And so that's why that mindset of yes, we can versus no, we really can't. I mean, I think that's where research really comes into play. Is it actually at its core, research is all about trying to find ways to make things work that we didn't think were possible before. And I think that is something that which, at a university level, a 4-year doctoral institution like Oregon State, and clearly there are a number of other ones in the United States, but the value of these institutions is just that research proposition, right? It's that it's not just about teaching stuff out of a textbook that we already know, but it's like writing the new textbook. Let's find the new stuff to modify the textbook or write a new textbook, the things we don't actually know right now or don't know very well. And yeah, that's really the value, I think, of these 4-year doctoral institutions, and what actually really excites me a lot about what I do. I mean, I love teaching, classes and in classrooms and whatnot, and watch people grow and students grow. But what I really like more than anything is watching a graduate student come in, with their undergraduate degree, and then watch them grow over a period of 3 or 4 years, where they really move from this idea of, oh, these are the limits of what we can do, to, oh, I don't know where the limits are of what we can do, and I'm going to push the boundaries to find out what those limits actually are. And I think that, to me, has been the most satisfying thing, certainly in my career, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing, and you kind of, I think you put an important shift to it. It's the research is just as important as the researchers and
Yes.
the people. And so when you're thinking about the next generation of nuclear engineers, do you have any strategies that you find sort of most effective in fostering this interest and an understanding for the future nuclear engineers, the students you're currently working with?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good question, actually. I'm not sure I've actually ever really thought about it a lot, but I think certainly what I really try to do is, again, try when I do talk with and it's also at the undergraduate level too, and certainly with graduate students, is try to foster this idea that, they've been told that there's all these limits, and just foster the idea that maybe they're not, or maybe these limits are much farther along than where we're right now, and try to give them some examples of, again, what we thought we could do at some time, or what the limit was of what we could do versus what we do now. I mean, one easy example is, growing up with a telephone with a cord on it, how I grew up. The whole idea now of walking around with a cell phone, I mean, it really is, it's closer to the communicator from Star Trek than it is to what I used when I was a kid. And so this idea that just because we've done something this way for ages doesn't mean we always have to do that, and just try to spur that in them, and kind of show them some examples. And the other big thing too is when they come up to me with ideas, hey, what do you think about this, Dr. Woods? Don't just say, no, we can't do that, or that's a terrible idea. Even if I actually don't think it's a great idea, talk to them about it, and kind of just find out what their thinking is, what they're trying to do with it, where they're going with it. And, maybe just guide them a little bit along the way, but at the same time, trying not to stifle that curiosity and that passion, because I think to some extent, the worst thing you can do when you're, for people who are passionate and curious, is to tell them, no, you can't see that, or no, you can't do that, but really just try to help them find the right doors to go through so they can keep moving forward. And so, yeah, I mean, that's all I think I really try to do largely, is just try to don't close the doors on the students, and really kind of guide them as they kind of make their way in their journey. And of course, they have to have the technical tools as well, right? There's one thing to have great ideas, but you also have to make sure that technically they can work through these ideas. And so a large part of what we do also is making sure that they actually have the toolbox that is going to allow them to actually do the real science and engineering to make these kind of dreams a little bit of a reality. And I think, going back to this idea of, universities, a lot of times we hear a lot of talk about, there are some folks which, you'll hear, oh, university professors, all they want to do is research and they don't want to teach. And I always push back on that, because I try to tell folks is that, yeah, no, teaching in a classroom is very, very important. But the reality is that as a university, everything we do is teaching. I mean, whether it be research or teaching in a classroom or labs, it's all teaching, it's all education. And when it comes to graduate students and creating the next generation of innovators. Research is, as you said, it's not just about the researchers, but it's also about the research itself. You can't create a great researcher if they've never done research, and if it's not important or not relevant, it's not good research, right? I mean, no one is going to learn anything by doing research which is trivial. And so you want to have, good, relevant research for the graduate students to learn how to do research on. And that's why it is so important at universities to have research, because that's really the only way you make researchers, MS, PhDs, because these are research degrees. And the only way you make them is by giving them good research to do. And at the same time, right, I think what I've noticed over the past 20 years, especially, is that, and we probably knew this beforehand, but I think nowadays, I think at Oregon State, we do a really good job at getting our undergraduates involved in research as well, because, learning in a classroom is wonderful, but actually doing research, even at the undergraduate level, also really, really helps their that educational process as well. And it also keeps them really passionate and really involved, because again, they're realizing it's not just about the constraints in the textbook, but rather it's about kind of pushing the boundaries that we do in research.
Absolutely. And kind of thinking maybe an element as well is also the not necessarily commercial applicability of research, but that is one aspect that, if you're able to see your research have also a commercial application or an impact into then further developing that. And it seems like you briefly mentioned earlier that some of the past work was actually, if I heard that correctly, was then sort of adopted into NewScale and that project. If you can speak just a little bit of that, about the experience of, taking research, within the lab and that commercial connection.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's one of these things. I don't know if Jose had a plan in 2000 that this was going to happen. I think to some extent there was some serendipity going on here, but yeah. So I mean, we had this DOE project, which ultimately we ended up building a test facility, which was kind of a scaled model of, well, the name wasn't great. It was called the Multi-Application Small Light Water Reactor, MASLAR. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, but that's ultimately is the concept of having a small modular reactor, with an integral, with the vessel inside of kind of an integral type of containment vessel itself. And so that's kind of was the genesis of that concept through this project. And I think what happened was, right, we had the test facility already built, and Jose actually was out for a year on a leave. I think it was a leave of absence at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so he was, I don't remember exactly the title or what his office title was, but I think largely he was working at kind of developing this idea of naturally circulation-driven reactors. And so a number of countries had different concepts. I mean, some used natural circulation only in normal operations. Some use it only in emergency situations. And again, I don't know, when I say natural circulation, if all the listeners would understand, maybe they would or not, but natural circulation is just the concept of is moving water around or fluid around by thermal gradients. So you don't need pumps, right? So we know that hot water rises and cool water falls, in the presence of gravity, and you kind of use that to move fluid around a reactor, in essence, and so you don't need any pumps. And this was kind of an interesting concept for the MASLAR design we had. It used natural circulation both during its transient conditions or its accident conditions, but also during normal operations, which I think was kind of interesting, and a lot of interesting technical problems involved in that, and technical analyses involved in that as well. But yeah, so Jose was at International Atomic Energy Agency, kind of coordinating efforts around different countries' programs within natural circulation in regards to nuclear reactors. And ultimately, based on a lot of that discussion with that group, I think there was a realization that perhaps there could be a commercial need for a reactor of this type. And I think Jose was talking with our dean at the time, and I think the dean had mentioned. I think the story goes, Jose and the dean were flying back from DC on a plane, And I think the dean just kind of offhandedly mentioned you should look at commercializing and patenting this technology. And I think that was probably around 2005, 2006. And that's kind of when the ball got rolling. So I don't think any of us really were thinking, hey, this is going to be this very large company in 20 years from now, but we just thought it was a really neat technology. We wanted to keep it alive, so we got some funding to kind of continue to do some experiments and collect some more data on the test facility, do some numerical simulations, did some publications on it. So we were kind of keeping it alive. But then I think around the 2006, 2007, finally, then Jose really got serious about working with the university to spin it out. And we have I don't even remember the name of the office here, but we have a technology development office at the university. And so they worked with him to develop some patents and some intellectual property, and then worked with him to basically start this company up. And I think it was 2007. About 7 folks were down. Corvallis is not a very large town, but they ended up renting out an old bank. And there was about 7 folks over there, I think, to kind of start the company. And that's kind of how it started back then. And here we are now. So again, I'm not sure that it was always, it was definitely something that we were thinking about back in the early 2000s. But over time, I think we all came to the realization that there was a need for this type of technology. And yeah, that's kind of how it was born. And I would also say that at the university here, at least at Oregon State, and I'm pretty sure we're not alone in this. There's definitely a lot of folks, in our administration, which are interested in obviously doing really great research, but it's also important to be able to try to take that research and implement it, in a larger societal context. And so I think when it's viable and when it makes sense, I think the university here, and I'm sure other universities are the same, are very helpful in trying to get us to kind of get this technology out when it's ready to be able to use it in society at large. Because I think it's important, right? That's, we have this research mission. It's all about education, but at the same time, if we have this technology that can be used to better society, we should do that. Yep.
That's really interesting to hear. And is there currently, I imagine there's plenty of different work streams, but is there something you're currently exploring or developing within the field of nuclear engineering that you're particularly excited about or interested?
Oh, I think I've largely been doing a lot of admin work recently in the last, since I took over this job. So I think for me, I'm still very interested in, gas reactors. I still have some work that I do in that space. Also interested in helping out in some of the other SMR reactors, the TerraPower and Kairos, the sodium and the molten salt reactors. Always interested in any type of work that's going on there in relation to thermal fluids. I am pretty excited about the micro modular reactors, even bringing these down a little bit smaller. I think that actually is potentially going to be a really exciting application of nuclear power, and we'll certainly see how that goes. So that is something that I'm kind of watching. I'm not doing any research personally in that area, but I'm certainly watching that area with a lot of excitement, because I do think that has a potential for some significant success and applications for us. But yeah, so for me, yeah, I mean, I think I've largely been doing a lot of admin work lately and not been as much involved in some of the research that's been going on. If I look at some of my colleagues around here, I think some of the really, real exciting part when it comes to nuclear energy, nuclear science and engineering is, and I think we're probably in the same boat as a lot of other industries, is the application perhaps of high performance computing, AI. I think digital twinning. I think these are areas which are super exciting. When I was an undergraduate and certainly in graduate school, so much of the research that we did was experimental, because really you needed to be able to do that because the computational resources really weren't there to kind of do a lot of the work in any type of economic fashion. But I think nowadays with some of the computer resources and tools we have, they really have taken off, in our industry. And I think a lot of the work that people are doing in that space is very exciting. And so certainly that is something that I look at with a lot of excitement, to see some of the stuff that folks here at Oregon State are doing around high performance computing and AI in relation to nuclear science and engineering. So that's something I'm very excited about as well.
Absolutely. No, AI is really bringing both some paradigm shifts in that aspect, and then even also from a demand aspect, right? Even AI and data centers also have a power demand. So it's kind of
Yes, that's right.
from
Yeah.
both from from all sides if one wishes. Now, of course, there's lots of, and I think as many listeners on here, we're well aware of the opportunities and the really exciting developments that are currently being experienced from all different kinds of SMR technologies. But at the same time, challenges remain. And the nuclear industry is an industry that's, I think, familiar with challenges. So yes, maybe from your perspective, what could be some of the largest challenges that remain for both on the research and development aspect, and maybe more on the just commercial on having the reactor built.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, well, again, and I'll speak yeah, to both sides, and certainly not necessarily being an expert in all things nuclear, right? There's an awful lot going in our industry that I'm not all that familiar with necessarily. But I think one of the things for newer reactors, which it does appear to be kind of one of the things that we have to really focus on, is materials, right? Because I think a lot of the kind of the challenges for the engineering for some of our these newer reactors, right? We're pushing the envelope on temperatures, pressures, or type of potential interactions between coolants and structural materials. And I think so materials really is going to be an area where it's very important, I think, for going forward for some of these newer reactor designs, just making sure that the materials are available, right? Because that I think is maybe some of the bigger challenges are focused in there. And certainly also then I think we did talk about AI and high performance computing, and certainly there is no doubt that these are going to play out like a primary role going forward, both in design and regulation or for nuclear energy, but also we just also want to remember, right, that from my perspective, I do have an experimental background, and we do want to always make sure that we have a really good confidence in those tools, right? So it's one thing to have tools, but it's another thing to make sure that you actually know how confident you should be in those tools. What's the uncertainty? What's your confidence in those tools? So I think we do want to make sure that we don't get that allow those tools, the computing assets, to kind of get ahead of the cart, right? Because then the tools may not be as effective as they could be. So just I think the other thing just to keep in mind for folks, and as we move forward, is just to make sure that we have a really good handle on what kind of confidence we have in those tools. And I think that is going to rely also on a decent amount of experimentation to make sure that we have the data to back those tools up going forward. And so I think so from my perspective, probably those are maybe the two biggest things that we just want to, from a technical perspective, kind of make sure that we deal with going forward. There are probably a number of other things. My expertise is more in the area of thermal hydraulics, and there's plenty of there's plenty of challenges there, but they're probably a little bit more nuanced. But I think the materials and then also the confidence in your tools are the kind of the bigger things. From a commercial aspect, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a secret that we have not necessarily, from a financial perspective, had the best performance for nuclear power, and there's a number of reasons for that. I think largely it ends up being the capital construction cost is what's largely hurt us over the years. I guess the Vogtle plant, they had their final cost was quite a bit different than what they initially budgeted. A lot of reasons for that. I totally understand it. And especially when it's a first of a kind versus an nth of a kind, very different type of proposition. But I do think that we're really going to have to start, and I say really going to have to start. We've already started. I mean, a lot of people are really thinking about this, and I think SMRs actually was one of the selling points for SMRs was to actually look at this problem of capital cost. And if you're building smaller modules, you're going to naturally build more modules for the same amount of power, and gets you to nth of a kind much more quickly than if you're just building like one reactor every couple of years or one module every couple of years. And so I think there are a lot of folks looking at how we can really both how we manufacture and design and build these reactors, how we can basically get this capital cost to a point where it's going to be competitive with our other competitors, whether they be renewables or natural gas or whatever. I mean, I mean, certainly we can argue and we can talk about subsidies and different regulations and this that depending on the different industries. I totally get that. So there is a lot of nuance in there. But I think ultimately, we have to be competitive in the marketplace. So whatever rules are in place, that's the the ballpark we have to play in. And so we just got to make sure that we are economically competitive, and that's ultimately, I think, one of the challenges that faces us going forward. Part of that, I said NuScale started in 2007. Right, they got their design cert, I think, but 2020 or 2021, can't remember exactly the year, but it's been relatively recent. So you're looking at, what, 12, 13, 14 years, and largely NuScale, although it relies on natural circulation. I mean, it's basically a pressurized water reactor, and it's the fuel product is maybe a different height, but it's largely the fuel product we've been using for quite a long while. So with a technology which is relatively well developed, it still took almost 15 years, and so this plays into the cost piece. And so again, it's important for us to be able to, I think, as best we can, especially with the technologies which we have maybe less of a history with, to be able to try to shrink that time from startup to actual design certification, and then certainly to build. And so whether that means we look at our the research programs and how we can streamline those or collaborate or whatever. But I do think that any effort we can have to kind of shrink that timeline from decades to maybe just a decade or less, I think would be really great from a perspective of capital cost as well, because it is a long-term both money and in time investment. If you're going to decide to roll out a new fission technology, it's a long haul. And so anything we can do to kind of make that less of a long haul, I think would be beneficial going forward. But at the same time, my background is in safety. And at the end of the day, no matter what we do, we don't compromise safety. I think that's the other thing too, that we have to make sure that the public doesn't question our safety culture of our designs, and whether that's for me, largely, I think that's building safety into the designs, right, intrinsically. And as much as we can do that, I think we got to really do that, because we don't want the public having questions about whether we're a safe technology or not. We really want them to be able to live near a nuclear power plant and sleep very soundly at night, because I think at the end of the day, the people are who we're serving, right? And we got to make sure that not only we can provide cost-effective electricity, but we also make sure that it's done safely and that it's perceived to be safe. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Fascinating, I think, reassumption, and also very much there might be, links between each of those categories, if you will, that you planned out.
Sure.
Maybe the materials might be both availability and reliability and safety, but then also the cost and it's quite connected. But that's also exciting, because there are opportunities for both new research and both new commercial opportunities at aiming to kind of realize this triadium of safety, cost, and then also reliability. And maybe kind of to end on a note on if you have any last thoughts to share, specifically with with listeners who might be thinking about nuclear, or thinking about maybe wanting to research nuclear engineering or just nuclear more broadly, and really just any kind of thoughts for some words of inspiration for them.
Yeah, well, okay. So if you're looking for words for inspiration, I think for me, what I tell students sometimes is, this is not my grandfather's nuclear industry, right? So this is, as I mentioned, I think early on, when I was originally thinking about nuclear power, I kind of think of the old movies of NASA engineers, where they've got these big glasses, pocket protectors. They're all wearing white shirts, and they're all got white guys wearing white shirts and suits. This is not that industry anymore. I mean, the nuclear power industry is super vibrant, lots of different folks in here in this industry, lots of different perspectives, a lot of different ways of looking at these problems. And so, yeah, so I think especially for younger folks, if anyone on this podcast is thinking about a career in nuclear, this is not a 1960s industry anymore. It is very much a 21st century industry, both in the makeup and the way we think and what we're doing. And so, yeah, so that's I think really maybe the biggest thing to take away is that we are an industry which I think has really made it into the 21st century, and I think that's great, and that's why ultimately I think I said early on I am pretty optimistic about the industry because of that, because of all these great people and their great ideas. That it's one of these things where it's really it can't fail because there's just too many great ideas and too many great people working in it. And so I am actually super optimistic for the future of nuclear. And again, if there are people on the podcast who are kind of nuclear ambivalent or nuclear agnostic or something of that nature, what I would always recommend, and what I always recommend to folks is don't let one group of people make up your mind. I mean, you can listen to me on this podcast, but certainly listen to folks on the other side, the people who don't like nuclear, and try to find then other references and or other publications that talk about the whole spectrum of perspectives when it comes to nuclear. Because I think at the end of the day, people who are well informed, generally, my experience has been make the best decisions. And so I would always encourage folks on this podcast to don't limit yourself to any one perspective on nuclear. Try to understand the whole problem as best you can, and you'll probably end up with a pretty good perspective after that. So,
on that note, Brian, we thank you for your time on Titans of Nuclear, and we hope to have you on in the future again.
Perfect. No, it was great, Francesca. I really appreciate giving me this opportunity. I had a great time. I can't believe the 45 minutes went by that quickly.
Boom, right on time.
Yeah, perfect.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.